Hello and welcome to Electoral Dysfunction with me, Beth Rigby.
Me, Ruth Davidson.
And me, Harriet Harman.
We all seem very far away this week.
Well, we've all been on active service.
Active. A tour of duty?
Beth's been on a tour of duty in Hull.
Yeah,
I've
been down and back to London in super quick time. And Harriet, you've been over the water. You've got an exciting new job to tell us about.
I have, and by rights now I should be sitting here in absolute a state of jet lag, and I've been trying to work out why I'm not. And I think it's just because it is incredibly energising, and I've just been in the UN at the Commission on the Status of Women, which is an annual gathering of women from all around the world. And the reason why I was there is because I'm now the UK's envoy on women and girls. Previously, that was a role that was held by a civil servant, and they've actually now appointed me to do it. So I'm not a minister. I don't have collective responsibility, but I do have the fantastic support of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office.
Round of applause, Beth. Round of applause for Harriet. Formalising the fact that you're a doughty champion of women and have been for decades, and now you've actually got the title to prove it. I can't think of anyone better. Well done, you.
But the thing about New York is there were doughty champions of women from all around the world. I mean, it is a global social, political and economic revolution, this women's movement. They are speaking about female genital mutilation. They are talking about child marriage and mandating the UN's machinery to actually do something about this. And the woman in UNICEF who's leading on child marriage, who's an official in the UN, she herself was a daughter of a 14-year-old, and she said, I am doing this to honour my mother and to make sure that I don't have the limitations she had. So it's not just a collection of everybody thinking, my God, how far we've gone in our own countries, but also they value our support for the work that's moving forward in some of the Muslim countries to try and tackle Afghanistan. And so we're very much in the family, in African advance, in South American advance, and on Afghanistan. And my next visit is I might well be doing my pod in Afghanistan, because that's where I'll be.
I'm delighted that you're going to continue to make trouble in all the right way.
Me too, but as long as you keep making trouble on this podcast and you don't leave us now for your global sisters.
Well, that's why you've been in New York all week, Harriet. Beth, why are you in Hull?
I am in Hull. I'm in a travel lodge. So if you go on YouTube, you can see my bed behind me. I should just do the podcast from bed next time.
That's a whole different type of podcast.
The reason I have mentioned the whole travel lodge is to try and entice you to come and watch us on YouTube. You can find us, Electoral Dysfunction, search it on YouTube if you want to watch us as well as listen to us. But the reason I am in Hull, Ruth, is because Keir Starmer came to Hull, and as you know, where he goes, I go. We are in Hull because he came up to Hull on Thursday morning to do a speech about government reform and waste. It was much, much bigger than I expected. And we're also going to talk this week about the row brewing in the Labour Party over benefits, because these benefits cuts are coming and the benches are getting quite lively. I think the biggest problem Keir Starmer had at PMQ's not Kemi Badenoch, it was his own MPs. And, of course, reform in turmoil. Goodness me, haven't they had a week of it? And they're fighting like rats in a sack, ferrets in a sack. Is there an advantage for the Conservatives? Is it going to dent reform? Dame Andrea Jenkyns, formerly of Ruth Davidson's parish, former Conservative MP. I went and hung out with Andrea Jenkyns in Lincolnshire, actually. I went all over the place with her, so we'll talk about that. So it's quite a lot, isn't it? I might need to get to that travel lodge bed and have a lie down before we carry on.
We also want to hear from you, so you can get in touch with us. As always, you can WhatsApp or voice note us on the burner phone. It is 07934 200 444. That's 07934 200 444. And can I just say, Rachel from Liverpool, thank you, my good woman, because she's done just that. And she messaged to say that she asked her 9-year-old son, Henry, what he wanted to listen to on the school run the other day. And without her even pressing play, Henry started to sing the Electoral Dysfunction theme tune. And she sent in evidence. This is the sweetest thing ever. Listen to this. Oh,
Bless
Henry.
him.
I literally...
What a champ.
Henry. Henry, you could become our mascot. I love that.
But we want more of you singing the theme tune. So if you can whistle it, if you can hum it, if you can play it on bagpipes, you can send us a recording and we might play it the next episode. And if you've got a cute 9-year-old, you've got more chance.
Well, I
That's all
think
I'm saying.
Henry has set the bar high for male allyship. They've got to be able to sing the theme tune for the Electoral Dysfunction in order to be a member of the Honorary Sisterhood.
I think
I
so.
love that.
But let's get into it. You've been in Hull, you've been listening to the Prime Minister. What has he actually been saying, Beth?
Let me set the scene because he came up to Hull and he's doing this speech on civil service reform and cutting waste. And it's all into the theme he has of renewal. You heard him talk about national renewal, and he's really kind of alighted on this fact that the state isn't working for people in the way it should. So he was quite strong on the prognosis. It was all an ever-expanding state. It's the weakest state, he said, he can remember seeing. He talked about democratic accountability being swept under the carpet because there's endless quangos, etc., etc. And he said that the public is not getting good value for money. But the thing is, it's the sort of thing I have heard lots of prime ministers say. You might remember Dominic Cummings' desire to kind of completely rip up the civil service and reimagine the state. But what Keir Starmer did today was that he actually put his money where his mouth, if you like, and he made a massive announcement because he announced that the government were going to scrap NHS England. Now, that is quite a big deal. So not only did he say we need reform, he said, and this is an example of how I'm going to do it. And he said he's doing it for a combination of things, one of which was democratic accountability and one of which was cost. Harriet, can you explain the significance of it to our listeners?
So NHS England, it's an organisation that runs the NHS in England. So this doesn't impact on Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland. It was set up in 2013 by the Tory government. And it was such a big, huge organisation that was set up that it was said at the time you could see it from outer space. But it isn't part of the government. So you had the Department of Health and you had this other huge organisation. Starmer's saying it's a doubling up and it's doing the same thing as the Department of Health.
It was, to me, like he had the bit between his teeth in a way that I've only seen Starmer like this on occasion. But this seems to have really got his blood going, if you like. And the reason I say that was he came out, we're at Reckitt Benckiser, which is a big fast-moving consumer goods company. And he was at their headquarters and he came out and it was like a campaign visit that I remember from the election. He had jacket off, sleeves rolled up. He was not speaking from a lectern and he was not doing a speech. So behind us, they had prompt boards where he would have notes, but not a speech. And he did one of his, what I would call a stump speech. And I sort of said to his team when he was doing it, I was like, he's very engaged. He seems very confident and assured in this. And they basically said that it is driving him mad, that every time he tries to do something, there's a review or consultation, and he's really frustrated, and that he really does feel very energised about all of this. The question I think that is in with all of this is that people might not argue. I mean, the state is massive. Loads of governments talk about how it needs to be reformed. But look, within all of this, when he says reform, I imagine quite a lot of people think austerity and cuts. This was the question. You've just announced the abolition of NHS England. There's about 13,000 job cuts there. You've also talked about an ever-expanding state, signalling, I think, thousands of other job cuts across the state. You're about to announce billions of cuts to welfare, so billions in welfare savings. At your manifesto launch, you said to me, and this is a direct quote, There will be no austerity under a Starmer government. If this isn't austerity, what is? And do you at least accept that some people will feel that this is austerity again?
Beth, there's no return to austerity. I said that to you before the election, and we're not going to austerity. I ran a public service, the prosecution service, during years of austerity, and I saw what was done in that particular case to our criminal justice system, but it's been done to our public services. And part of the problem we've got with our public services is what was done to them a decade or so ago. So we're not going down that route, and none of our plans are going down that route. When it comes to welfare, there are important principles. We must support those that need support, but equally we must help those who want to get back into work.
I think what's driving this and why he feels so energised and insistent on it is actually, well, two things. Firstly, because he knows there's massive opportunities of artificial intelligence to really transform and improve the way public services work. But above all, because he wants delivery. He knows he's got to deliver, and the civil service is the machinery through which the government needs to deliver, and therefore the civil service needs to be shaped in a way that it can actually deliver the government's priorities, which the people want to see and voted for.
The thing that struck me, though, about everything he said was that what he's actually doing in government is he is taking a lot of what Conservative governments might do of the past. I'm thinking defence spending increase, cutting the aid budget. I'm interested to see what the unions will say about this. But Ruth, I mean, many Labour people might think he's going to the right. Many of your side might think, shucks, he's doing everything we might do.
You might say it's not a return to austerity, but the dictionary definition is difficult economic conditions created by government measures to reduce public expenditure. If you're cutting lots of people that are employed by the state, if you're reducing the money that's spent, and we're going to go talk about benefits, if you're trying to reduce budgets within department, that is it. He might not like the term. He doesn't want to be considered the same as a kind of George Osborne type. He can call it what he likes, but that's what it is. The second thing that kind of struck me was it's a bit early term Blair in that I think what he's doing quite well and what his government is doing quite well is they are diagnosing the problems very well. But when it comes to the solutions, actually they're quite basic. Some of these are very knotty and complex problems. And there's jeopardy in that because the reason that NHS England was set up, partly, one was to make things work better, but the other was to stop the NHS from being a political tool, from stopping ministers having that direct control that says you must, I don't know, put all your resources into cancer treatment times this month, and then actually people that are waiting on hip replacements don't get seen for 4 years, etc. It's, you know, it was to try and take the politicisation out of the NHS. To say that it's going to come directly back under ministerial control, under the Secretary of State, under his key lieutenant, Wes Streeting, if stuff goes wrong, there's jeopardy there. So it really will keep their feet to the fire to make sure that they continue to make improvements.
I do think, Ruth, that you have a point, which is the prognosis or the diagnosis, if you like, of what is wrong. He sort of said, I'm going further and faster on red tape. I'm going to save money by curbing compliance. I'm going to end the watchdog state. No more detail. And in fact, the Conservatives were quick to point out that Labour's already created 27 quangos or task force since they've been in government.
Now, it's just struck me, ladies, we've not actually explained what a quango is. So in
yeah.
terms of what it stands
My
for,
bad.
It stands for a quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisation, which gets you a lot of points at Scrabble, but basically means it's an organisation that's set up, so it's sort of funded by government, and it answers to Parliament or government, depending on its structure, but it isn't actually of the government, so it's sort of a bit separate.
It's the quasi-autonomous.
money.
It's the quasi-autonomous bit in the name that drives government ministers mad, because it's their autonomy that they're constantly saying, oh, you can't come in and tell us what to do because we're quasi-autonomous. And I think sometimes that can get in the way of the government actually doing things.
I mean, Harriet, I guess you can sort of see where he's going. Are you sceptical about it, or do you sort of see that it is a gargantuan task? And are you concerned about internal pushback that he's going to get, not just from the civil service or public sector workers, but also his own party?
I don't think so, because I think it's so all about delivery, and those organisations and task force that have been set up precisely around delivering on the manifesto objectives. So there's nothing ideological about it, and Keir Starmer has said this himself. And although, as Ruth says, there's nobody else to blame. If it's wrong, it's clearly the Department of Health, not NHS England. I think they're less interested in who's going to get the blame if it goes wrong, and really purposefully hooked on the notion of actually making sure it's right.
After the speech, one of the people that was there came up to say hello, a guy called Sal. I hope you don't mind me repeating this, Sal, if you're listening to this podcast. But he basically said, I sort of said to him, what did you think of the speech? And he said, to be honest, when Starmer first became Prime Minister, I wasn't sure about him, didn't think that much of him. And he said in recent weeks, the kind of way he's behaved on Ukraine and handled all of that, he said, I'm beginning to like him more and get him more. And it did occur to me that he is a bit of a slow burn Starmer, isn't he? He got off to a terrible start. And he's a sort of slow burn Starmer. I think that might be my new little kind of phrase for him, because it's almost like he's getting into, having had this very stuttering start, he's kind of getting in a bit more into the groove of what he's trying to do. Now, whether he can deliver it, I mean, is a whole another question.
I'm sure he will deliver it, because he started so early on it and there's such clear intent. But I think he thinks it'll be popular as well. I thought it was interesting, a week or so ago at the Scottish Labour Party conference, Anna Sarwar said that if he becomes First Minister of Scotland, he will set up a Department of Government Efficiency, a Doge. So I think there's a sense that people want to see their public servants delivering on the things that they are so frustrated about, like not being able to get a GP appointment and things like that.
Now, Beth, when you were at the speech, the other question that you asked, it was about this story that's being briefed, but with maddeningly few details, which is, come the spring statement, there's going to be a ton of cuts to welfare, and Labour's really going to get a handle on it, but they're not telling anywhere where these cuts are going to fall. And you know, quite understandably, there's a lot of people that feel quite nervous about this. In fact, we've had a message in from Arthur, who sent us a voice note.
Hi guys, my name's Arthur, I'm 30, I live in Newcastle, and my mum's carer. I do all the shopping because she can't pick up anything heavy. Take her to all her hospital appointments and everything. She can't manage her money or plan a journey. I do everything for her. She gets PIP, I get universal credit and carer's allowance. I'm just wondering what the panel make of Labour's recent changes to the benefits, because it's got everyone worried, including me and me mum.
Thanks, Arthur, for sending that in. And this is the real life of what they're talking about in the Commons. And at the moment, the truth is, we don't know where they are looking to cut. We think it will be around potentially the PIP, which is personal independence payments, and they're for individuals with long-term illnesses or disabilities, designed to help with additional living costs, eligibility based on assessment, not means tested. Will they tweak that? I just don't know yet, Arthur, and I'm sorry I can't give you the answer. But I think it is safe to say that there will be a few billion found in savings. And the government would argue that 1 out of 8 young people are not in education, employment or training. And this is an area where the government keeps coming back to in terms of their focus. But I think it's going to be really bumpy. I mean, what do you both think?
I don't know Arthur's situation, only just what he said in the voice note. But we also have to remember at this that without sort of family carers or friendship carers, so unpaid carers out there, the country would be in a really difficult place, because the social care is completely on its knees. And if you needed the state to do the shopping that Arthur does for his mum, or, you know, you needed the kind of ambulances to do the hospital visits and stuff like that, you know, actually it would cost people a lot more. So we do have to keep in mind that sometimes a trim to one bill in one area, so individual payments to individuals, can put up costs to government somewhere else. And I think in terms of the analysis, you've got to be really kind of quite sophisticated in that. If the Tory party had anything about them in how they approached Labour doing something that's going to be difficult and that will have backbenchers up in arms, I mean, they would be running stories or lines about how, since Labour have come in 7 months, they've shown they hate pensioners, they hate business and they hate farmers. Why do they hate the disabled too? But they won't, because they're all over the shop.
It is undoubtedly a difficult issue. And whilst Labour members of Parliament, and I would say the public too, really recognise that there is a problem that needs to be dealt with of people who've been kind of thrown on the scrap heap and not supported to get into work, and who actually want to work, and that the system doesn't help them get into work, that is a genuine issue that the government needs to address. There is also a problem about ensuring that in the changes you make, you're incredibly careful that you distinguish those who actually can be helped into work, and you get them the right support, but you leave alone and you continue to support those who don't. And that is the worry. But I think that Number 10 knows that Labour MPs are very worried about it. And unlike with the winter fuel payments or with the overseas aid cuts, they've had 2 solid days of getting MPs into Number 10 back to back for round tables, listening to their concerns, taking that on board. And ministers have been actually proactively reaching out to MPs and getting them in. So they're doing a major political management operation.
Just to put it into context, the welfare bill for health and disability benefits, it's projected to rise to about 100 billion a year. If you're the Chancellor or the PM, you're looking at this and thinking, this is going to become unsustainable because working people through tax are funding this, and it means that we can't invest as much in other public services. And to go back to kind of what's the big picture, and then to answer Arthur's question about what are they actually looking at. I mean, when I asked the Chancellor about it, and I sort of said to her, you're going to adapt the personal independence payments, you're looking at targeting that. She came back with a broad answer of it's too big a burden on the economy, the bills, the cost of this welfare. And she said, because we're missing out on the contribution of people, and what a waste of talent that we park people on benefits rather than supporting them in work. And really that is the principle of it. But I can imagine for many people out there on benefits, it must create huge anxiety. And I mean, a Prime Minister does not get 400 plus MPs into Number 10, clear his diary, his incredibly busy diary for hours, to spend time with MPs, if he does not understand that he has a massive political fight on his hands around this. And there's apparently up scores of MPs that could rebel on it. I mean, it's going to be a big political battle for him, isn't it, Harriet?
He doesn't want a major political distraction from the sectarian left, but he does want to reassure MPs who need to be out there talking about why this is a good mission. So that's why he's like front-loading political investment into this, which is the right thing for him to be doing, I reckon.
So, as I was reading the Times the other day, I found the How Labour Can Avoid the Harman Trap by Patrick McGrath. I rubbed my hands in glee and I'm like, she's back in the papers. What's she done now? Anyway, this is the column. It's about nothing in politics is as instantly forgettable as the morning broadcast round, except for Harriet Harman. In 1997, Harriet Harman being interviewed by John Humphreys on the Today programme. Labour MPs of a certain age can apparently still quote the whole exchanges, Patrick writes. It went so badly, Tony Blair's Number 10 briefly threatened to stop cooperating with the show altogether. And this was all about you, Harriet, as the Social Security Secretary, responsible for New Labour's cuts to benefits, having to defend the benefits. And basically John Humphreys got you, didn't he? Because he kept asking about lone parents, single mums and benefits cuts. Sorry, is this like PTSD for you? Are you like Beth Dover?
It is. I'm slightly triggered by all these Labour MPs around at the time who are still remembering it and gleefully saying how dreadful it was. Thank you guys for that. That was just the sort of environment that I was in at the time. But let me just tell you about that, because there's lots of parallels between what we were trying to do then and what the government is trying to do now. So basically, when I came into government and was Secretary of State for Social Security, I inherited two things. One was a commitment in our manifesto that we would stick for 2 years within each departmental spending limit that had been set by the previous Tory government for the subsequent 2 years. After the 2 years, obviously we're going to increase everything and everything's going to be marvellous, but you've got to do these cuts now. That's one thing. And the second thing was I inherited a situation which was completely wrong, which was lone mothers. More and more women were going out to work, married women were going out to work, but lone mothers were trapped in the benefit system. In that, if you were a lone mother, if you were a lone parent, you were on benefit, which was income support, until your youngest child was 16. You were literally signed off work and paid through the government, through the welfare, for until your youngest child was 16. So if you had 3 children, it could be more than 20 years that you would be receiving income support, and you actually could not go into the job centre, the employment office as it was known in the time, to get support to get into work, and you certainly couldn't get any childcare to help you get into work. So what we wanted to do, because lone parents wanted to do it, was actually help them in the job centre find work, and also help them with childcare to look after their kids while they were working. But having heard all those MPs complaining about me, still, I'm feeling less likely I want to take the blame and more likely to say that they should have recognised that what we were trying to do and what we ultimately did do was right, because we did help lone parents get into work, which not only reduced the benefit bill, but it made their families much better off.
Harriet, do you feel like 30 years on you're still being misrepresented then?
Well, I must be, bearing in mind. But I just think, there are parallels. I'm sure I didn't handle it as well as I could. But hopefully, why don't they just learn from that experience rather than saying how rubbish I was?
Oh, I feel bad now.
It's hard though.
We don't think you're rubbish.
Well, I think what's helpful to you is that you actually believed in what you were doing. So even if you were getting, the terrier that was John Humphrys, like nipping at your ankles, at least you knew what you were trying to explain and why you're trying to explain it.
Anyway, I got sacked, so everybody moved on.
Why did you get sacked?
Well, because it was a debacle and nobody wanted to own it, and so they cured the problem by firing me.
They handed you social security, told you that you had to stick to Tory spending reforms. You had to stick to budgets, even though inflation and wages going up and all the rest of it meant that actually meant cuts. And then they wouldn't stand by you as you did what they had instructed you to do in the best and most kind of compassionate way. And then they sacked you for having a bad outing on the Today programme. I'm surprised that you don't have a voodoo doll of them in your house and you're sticking pins in Peter Mandelson nightly.
Well, I don't actually, but, overall, I think, what we did was absolutely right, but I didn't handle it as well as I should have done, and I was left on my own on it.
Well, I have to say, I think that Liz Kendall, who's the Secretary of State, and actually Alison McGovern, I think they are absolutely certain and sure that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer will stand behind them. I don't think anyone's going to be left out to dry on this.
I mean, I wonder about Liz Kendall, Harriet, because there's been some briefings. There's a few briefings against her knocking about, aren't there? What do you think?
I agree with Ruth. I think there's a lot of evidence of solidarity. I hate those sorts of briefings. I don't think anybody should be briefing against Labour ministers who are trying to implement the manifesto. She is incredibly competent and leads a really dedicated team. So I think they should just shut up and pull together.
Okay, well, we'll watch that space. It's going to be a big moment when these benefit reforms are announced. Right, okay, well, look, let's move on to a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Ruth Davidson's favourite subject, the rise of reform. Okay, we're back now. It's one bit of party infighting to another, isn't it, Ruth? What's been going on with your favourite other party?
You look at you just dangling that worm there, just thinking I'm going to snap it off the hook, because I'm not a fan of the Reform Party. But what we have at the moment is Reform got millions of votes, but they got only 5 seats. Nigel Farage is the leader. One of their kind of higher profile, I guess, of the 5 is a chap called Rupert Lowe. He's a businessman, and there has been a kind of massive falling out between them. And Rupert Lowe was in the media saying, questioning Farage's leadership. And then suddenly there's been a big investigation about him, saying that he's been bullying staff members. He says he's not. Some of his other staff members have put up a letter out there saying Rupert's actually a great boss. None of this is true. And he's had the whip withdrawn, and it's because of behavioural issues, and it's all playing out in public. Like it is proper sort of political equivalent of eye scratching and hair pulling that's going on. I mean, it is really not what you think men in their 60s should be acting like when they've got responsible jobs like being a member of parliament.
Rupert Lowe is robust, as is Nigel Farage, so it feels extremely personal. It's not going away, and I think meanwhile the Labour Party and the Conservative parties are rubbing their hands in glee, because the party that was meant to be different from the rest of them are now displaying signs of not being that different at all, and having very public disagreements that is distracting from perhaps the politics that they want to talk about publicly. Look, I got a chance to speak to Dame Andrea Jenkyns earlier this week. Now, she was a former Conservative MP. She lost her seat in the last election. She's a massive Boris Johnson backer, and she defected to Reform. She's now one of the few women at the top of the party, and the reason that she's really interesting is that she might become the Lincolnshire mayor. So I went to hang out with her this week, but obviously I had to ask her about this row, and this is what she said.
Look, I was in the Conservative Party for all those years, and it was infighting on steroids, wasn't it, really? I was probably partly to blame, calling PMs to resign. But I'm putting it into perspective, actually, Beth.
It's more than a spat, though.
Yeah,
it's more than a spat.
I mean, clearly it's a big falling out. There's concerns on both sides. I can see what it looks like, Beth, and I'm not one to mince my words. It doesn't look great, agreed. This has got to have its day. I don't want to see it in the news any more days. We've got to actually focus on winning now.
You can watch that actually on Sky News, that interview and the piece we did. You can watch that, in fact, as this podcast lands. I mean, look, she acknowledged it was damaging. I mean, does it take the sheen off them, Harriet? What do you think your colleagues are saying about it?
Well, I don't think they're complacent about reform, but I think that it's just reminded them that when we get to a general election, and we're miles away from a general election, if Reform is putting itself forward as a genuine alternative party of government, they won't get anywhere near that when they're absolutely a shambles and they're riven by division. So I don't think anyway Nigel Farage, when he said his Reform is a different sort of party, he never said it was different because it's not the sort of party that fights amongst itself, because his track record, if anything, is about every party he's ever been in has been absolutely riven by factions. And the nearer they get to being a prospect for actually being the official opposition, or, God help us, being in government, the more people will think, but do we want a rabble? We just recently had a rabble in the Tory party, and Reform right now make the Tory rabble divisions look like nothing.
I mean, it is so interesting because we're coming up to the May local elections. So some councils are actually not having elections, but there are a bloody lot that are. I mean, it's all very well for the Tories to be pleased that they're having a fight and it's taken the sheen off Nigel Farage and his band of men, because they are all men in the Commons for Reform. But does it really solve the Tories' problem with Reform?
Well, no, it's absolutely no good whatsoever for the Tories to just sit back and think this will do for Reform, because actually we've got to start rebuilding, listening to people, showing that we understand why they voted us out of office, doing the hard yards of putting together a policy programme that shows that we are listening in a way that the new government's not, and doing the hard work of opposition, none of which is being done, incidentally, as I've moaned about a great deal. But I think there's more to this spat than just Nigel Farage falls out with everybody in his party, even though it's true. Nigel Farage is about broadening the offering, about making the party more acceptable to more people, and a greater receptacle, almost a blank slate, that if you're scunnered with Labour and you're scunnered with the Tories, the place that you then go is Reform. And that's how they put on votes and seats across the country and become a bigger machine, and they've got more people to hang it off. The idea that Reform because they've had a fight that some people have seen, is now going to pack up and go home is for the birds. I mean, there was a poll out this week and the Tories are in third, on 23% of the vote, less than a quarter of the country. So the idea that Kerry Badenoch doesn't have to, get her finger out and actually start doing some of the hard yards, that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, latest YouGov polling has Labour 1 point ahead of Reform. But to be fair to Andrea Jenkyns, she went straight into the middle of Lincoln. That's the Labour bit of the constituents. So she was prepared to go into potential hostile territory and take cameras in there. And in fact, people were pretty okay with her, and she got quite a good reception. And I think Reform really are tapping into that sense of people still wanting to give certainly the Conservatives a smack on their nose and unconvinced by Labour. So let's see how they do in those locals.
But I think one of the things that might happen with this spat, this big fallout in Reform, is that it might put off donors. So we might actually see a reduction in their finances.
I think one of the interesting things about Lincolnshire, and if she does win the mayoralty, it will be a moment in which a Reform figure, politician, is actually governing something, running something, in control of something. And that does take it to a different level, doesn't it, than being 5 MPs in the Commons, moaning about everything, protesting. She'll actually be running something.
And I think that people know what they expect from mayors now. They've seen what Andy Burnham's done. They've seen, what Tracy Brabin's done. They've seen what Steve Rotherham's done in Liverpool and Sadiq Khan's done in London. So there is quite a high bar now for mayors. They've been pretty effective. So if she looks like the one that doesn't do anything except moan about Westminster, she will have been deemed to have failed.
Well, look, watch this space. I've got my little popcorn box and I'm just watching the latest from Farage Low because it's not going anywhere soon. But we are going somewhere. We've got to leave. I've got to go back to London. Ruth needs to maybe walk the dog. Don't know what you have to
go
do,
pick
Ruth.
up my son. Yeah, from school.
Pick up her son. Harriet, what are you doing? What have you got to go and do?
I'm re-engaging with the grandchildren while simultaneously planning my trip to Afghanistan.
I'm very interested to hear the dispatches from Afghanistan from you, Harriet. That's almost it for today. Don't forget to WhatsApp your versions of our theme tune like Henry did. You can WhatsApp us on 07934 200 444.
And if you're not already, do give us a follow on your podcast app, or you can send us to a friend or two.
Goodbye. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Do 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 do.